Isaiah chapter 9. Let's begin with verse 1. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Christmas, if I'm thinking correctly, is the only Christian holy day that is also a major secular holiday, perhaps the world's largest secular holiday. So we end up with two celebrations taking place at the same time, and perhaps more than a little bit of discomfort to go all around for everybody. As Christians, we can't help but notice how the public observance of Christmas keeps pushing Christ out of the picture. Non-religious people find the traditions and the reasons for celebrating to be irritating and intrusive. I suppose it is awkward for a secularist when their child or grandchild comes up to them and asks, what does that song mean, born to give them second birth? Over the years, business has become so commercially dependent upon Christmas that it's indispensable. And so it will remain with us as a secular holiday. My concern is that because of this, the true meaning of Christmas will be lost as our society becomes increasingly unaware of its historical root. And yet at the same time, in Christmas I see an opportunity. As our society becomes more secularized, as our faith is increasingly, at least in public, being pushed to the margins, here is an opportunity for you and I to be a powerful witness, because during this time of year, society and church are focused upon the same thing. One of the first signs of Christmas is the appearance of lights. They seem to be everywhere, from the White House to the local communities downtown to the malls and the neighborhood mall. The lighting of the Christmas tree is a pretty big deal. They are beautiful, and many of us enjoy driving around to see the various displays. I don't know if any of you have gone to see it, but they have a marvelous display of lights out at National Trail Raceway. It does cost, so I want to let you know, because the line's long and once you're in it, you can't get out. But if you have a chance to go, you should. It's a beautiful thing. But the lights aren't simply beautiful decorations. Light is a sign of a deeper meaning. And for that, there are two things I want to share with you this morning. The first of these is the reality of darkness. The reality of darkness. When I walk into a room, even during the day, one of the first things I do is I turn on the light. Even if I'm putting a book back on the shelf in my study or putting clothes in the basket for the laundry, I just do that. My eyesight is not as good as I want it to be. And even with a simple task, I want to see as clearly as I can. Well, similarly, we live in a dark world. And we will never find our way without Jesus as the light. Matthew, in chapter 4 of his gospel, writes part quotes part of our passage here in Isaiah 9. John, in his gospel, writing about Jesus, said this: "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world." In the Bible, darkness is equated with evil. It's equated with ignorance. And this world is evil. It's filled with untold suffering. And at the time of Jesus' birth, the world was filled with violence and injustice. It was filled with abuse of power and displaced refugees and broken up families and oppressive tyrants, just like it is today. And the world is ignorant because no one has the knowledge to fix what ails us. Why do we need God's light? Well, let's look at the previous chapter, Isaiah chapter 8, and wouldn't you know, I didn't mark it. All right, I'll use this Bible. Chapter 8, let's pick up with verse 19. "And when they shall say unto you, seek them that have familiar spirits, and wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God for the living to the dead? To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And they shall pass through it, hardly be stead and hungry. And it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves, and curse their king and their God, and look upward. And they shall look unto the earth, and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, and they shall be driven to darkness." Why are they in darkness? Why are they empty and angry and stressed out? Chapter 8, verse 22 tells us. They look to the earth. They look to human resources to find their answers. And we do the same thing today, thinking that we can fix our problems. Some people look to government. More people look to Wall Street. Most people look to technology. If we just had the right people, if we just had the right programs, if we just had enough money in place, we could fix what ails us. Years ago, an ad appeared in the New York Times that said, "The meaning of Christmas is that love will triumph and that we will be able to put together a world of unity and peace." In other words, if we just come together, if we just work together, we can rid the world of all that is evil. Really? You know, in our country alone, over the last 50 years, we've spent $20 trillion on the war on poverty. And the same percentage of people who live in poverty is the same that it was in 1965 when they initiated these programs. In the state of Ohio alone, how much money have we spent? Billions of dollars over the last 5 to 10 years on different addictions, not just the opioids, but the alcohol and the gambling. You know, we wanted to get the casinos in to fund the schools, and now we run commercials for people who have addiction problems. It's amazing. Václav Havel, he was the first president of the Czech Republic following the collapse of communism in the Soviet Union. A born-again man who said this: "Pursuit of the good life will not help humanity save itself, nor is democracy alone enough. A turning to and seeking of God is needed because the human race constantly forgets that it is not God." When it comes to Christmas, when you watch the TV shows, the movies, when you listen to the songs, there is a real play on the sentiment, is a real play on sentimentalized emotions and feelings. I'll be home of Christmas. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas. Now, I'm not knocking those songs. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I am saying this. Christmas in reality is the most unsentimental, most realistic way of looking at life. The message of Christmas is we are in a dark world. It is messed up, and we can't fix it. But you and I can have hope because a light has dawned. And this light does not spring from the earth. It has dawned upon the earth. And this light has come from the outside. Jesus has brought us this light because He Himself is that light, and He is the one that will save us. The second thing I would share with you this morning is the reality of light. In speaking of God's light dawning upon the earth, Isaiah is speaking symbolically about the sun, and he's drawing from its characteristics. For our purposes this morning, we'll look at three things. First of all, light gives life. If the sun went out, if the sun would die, we'd all freeze to death. The Bible says in Luke's writing, Acts chapter 17:28, that in God we live and move and have our being. We exist because God is the one who holds and keeps everything together. Second, light reveals the truth. You drive your car at night with the lights off, and eventually you're going to crash into reality. Light shows us how things really are. They show us their true position and condition. And only as God reveals Himself can we know who He is and where we stand in relation to Him. And then third, light is beautiful. I really love the show up there at National Trail Raceway. It can be dazzling, and it brings joy and delight, and we need light for joy. I am told that many people up in Alaska, during the winters that last 6 months long, they have black lights in their homes, so they have the UV rays to help ward off the effects of depression that comes from the dark. God is that source of everything that is beautiful and joyful. St. Augustine wrote, "Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Thee." All that you love this morning, all that I love this morning, are gifts from the hand of God. He alone is the source of life, truth, and joy. We can't produce this within ourselves. So how does this light dawn, or literally, if you translate it literally from the Hebrew, how does it flash upon us? Our text tells us, "For unto us a child is born." A child comes to us, and He brings the light with us. And this child is called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Names that belong to God alone. And the fact that this child has come as a gift from God implies two things for you and I today. If Jesus is truly mighty God and everlasting Father, as it tells us here in Isaiah, then you just can't like Him. You can't just like Him, be fond of Him, think He's a nice guy. You read about Him in the Gospels. No one who ever encountered Jesus Christ and understood the claims He made about Himself remained neutral. They either worshiped Him or they rejected Him. And if the baby born at Christmas is the mighty God, then you and I must serve Him because He is God. But not only must we serve Him, if Jesus is also the Wonderful Counselor and the Prince of Peace, then you and I should want to serve Him. Do you understand that we have something that no other religion, in fact, nothing else in this world, offers to us? Here is a God who was born in human flesh. And because He was, He understands us. Here is a God who had courage. He could have stayed up there on the throne, crossed His hands and shook His head and just let us all be damned to the lake of fire forever. But instead, He had courage. He left all the comfort. He left all the glory and security. And He came and suffered. He was rejected. He was crushed by injustice. He was abandoned by friends. He was tortured, and then He died. Thank God for Easter, He rose again. But because of that, He knows what you are going through this morning. And when you tell him about it, he truly gets it. And he did all of this of his own free will simply because he loves us. He shows us the truth. He gives us life. He frees us from bondage, not just physical bondage, but spiritual bondage, emotional bondage. He heals the scars. He sets us free. Our past no longer has to ever define us. For in light of all that he's done for us, why wouldn't we want to serve him? When it comes to the light of Christmas, not only was a child born, Isaiah also says that a son has been given. God's Son is a gift. But it's just like any other gift that you would receive at Christmas. It can only be yours if you're willing to receive it. And you must be willing to receive it because it's a gift of grace. You and I have done nothing to deserve it. And verse 5 hints at that. It hints that there's a battle to be fought, an oppressor to overthrow, a victory to be won, and it cannot be brought about by human power or ingenuity. Someone else must do the fighting for us, and that someone is God's Son. 1 Peter 2:9 tells us that we have been called out of darkness into God's marvelous light. And when he was grown, this Son, Jesus, died on the cross and paid the penalty for our sin. In order to live in the light of his love, you must receive the gift of his Son. You have to admit your flaws and your weaknesses, that you need help. You have to swallow your pride and admit you're a sinner and give up control of your life. That's humbling. But that's what Jesus requires. And he's right to require it because he has done, it is exactly what he has done himself. Humbling himself, paying our penalty so that we might live because he loves us. When you realize and admit that you cannot save yourself or even truly know yourself outside of his love and grace, that's when you and I begin to discover the true meaning of Christmas. And it's then that you and I begin to truly live.